Welcome to you all to the February 2024 edition of AMAASE. Ask me anything about social enterprise, and this is your opportunity to ask those burning social enterprise questions. Happy Valentine's Day to those of you. We love having you here to talk about social enterprise. My name is Leah Bordelin, and I'm the Associate Director of Programming for numerous centers at the Haskayne School of Business, including the Trico Foundation Social Entrepreneurship Center. And today it's my pleasure to be your host. A quick note that today's session is recorded for those folks who aren't able to attend our live session. Or if you want to go back and rewatch the discussion, we will make these available for you on YouTube. And just another sort of note, please note that we cannot provide you with legal information or legal advice in these sessions. We do provide information, but we certainly can't provide legal advice for you. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Calgary is situated on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I'm tuning in from my home with my weird sunbeams that show up in my house here. We're all on Treaty 7 territory. We're situated on land that isn't too far away from the Bow, which has shaped this land and people for generations. I believe that treaty is a responsibility and a relationship, and I take this belief quite seriously. I feel that we are all treaty people. If you're joining us from outside of Calgary today or outside of Treaty 7 and would like to acknowledge the territories where you are, please feel free to share that in the chat. All right, so AMAASE is our monthly opportunity for members of our ecosystem to access and ask questions of a panel of capacity builders. This is held on the second Wednesday of every month, and that's today, from 3:30 to 5. These sessions are designed with our audience and attendees as the driver of the conversation. So it's your time and your questions that we're here for. So I invite you to start getting your questions ready. Some of you have submitted those questions ahead of time, but we will have plenty of time for all questions. We're really looking forward to it. I'd like to welcome our panelists for today. First, we have Jane Bisbee, who's the Executive Director of the Social Enterprise Fund. Welcome to you. We have Dan Overall, the Executive Director of the Trico Charitable Foundation. We have Brittany, who's the Manager of the Social Entrepreneurship Training and Funding at the Trico Charitable Foundation. Jerome Morgan is here. He's the Associate Director of the Social Innovation Hub. And Philip Lozano is here. He's the B Local Manager at Momentum. Is there anyone here who has a question they would like to start us off with? Great. John and Natasha. I'm guessing maybe you're Natasha.
Yeah, sorry. It's Natasha from Mini Green Havens, and this is my first time attending. And with everybody I've been talking to, I want to make sure I'm coming to the right spot. So I live in Fort McMurray. I opened my business, and all of my profits I turn back into the community, supporting other nonprofits. Like, I'm not a nonprofit, I'm just for-profit, but supporting nonprofits. Is that a social enterprise? The government never knows where to put me. And so I guess that's where I kind of want to start. If you don't mind, 2 minutes.
So, sorry. The reason why they don't know where to put you is because there's actually there's not one business structure for social entrepreneurship. There's no legal structure for social entrepreneurship. So for them, you're a for-profit organization, right, who's moving their profits towards charitable good. And so for Trico, we don't really focus on whether you are or aren't a social entrepreneurship. It's different way or social enterprise. It's different ways that you can have impact, right? So the way that your organization is working, and there's probably other ways you're working as well, but one of the ways that you're working is through your profit. So you use your profit to further your mission, further your why, further your goals. So you would fall under a social enterprise label for us, but I don't think that's going to help you in terms of the government wanting to put you somewhere, right? That's what I would flag.
That's all I really want to know, because so far, every time I ask people questions or try to get advice, because I've never done this before,
Mhm.
and I've only, I'm a little, I always just get business advice and nobody understands what I'm doing. And then when I do, everybody's like, go become a social profit, which I discussed with my lawyer. And my lawyer says, no, 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 don't be doing that. So I'm torn. But thank you. I will shut
Yeah.
up and listen now.
Well, and I will say, like, you will get people who will say you can't be a social enterprise because you're a for-profit, or because transferring your profit doesn't equal social entrepreneurship. People will argue till they're blue in the face about what social entrepreneurship is and what social entrepreneurship isn't. For us, sort of the focus is, what are your goals with the work that you're doing, not necessarily your legal status. And one of the ways in which organizations do have impact is through their profit. And I think, like, one of the interesting things too is thinking about how your organization could evolve or change, and the different ways that you can have impact. We have a tool called the 4 Ways that relates to different ways that we see social entrepreneurship having impact. So that might get your kind of juices flowing in terms of some other ways to do that, if it's something that you're interested in. But unfortunately, everybody's going to argue with you about whether you're not or you are. And that's just the reality.
So in a
Everybody has their own
nutshell, you're
definition.
saying if I get in contact with Trico, you might be able to help me figure out where I'm going or where I should evolve,
We
to
definitely have,
get advice.
yeah, we definitely have tools. They're all available online too, which is nice when you're in Fort McMurray and we're not in Fort McMurray. So we have tools that help organizations start thinking about, well, what type of impact are we having, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Or starting to think about, well, where are we headed? What are our goals with this? And then even some stuff, as you say, well, all my profit goes here. Well, what are my costs? What are my steps that I have to do? What could this evolve to over time? If you want it to evolve, you may not. But there's some tools that we have for sure that if it's a directional thing, we don't give legal advice, but we always talk about, and you're getting pushed by your lawyer, but we always talk about really figuring out what we want to do, so our function, and then deciding the form that makes the most sense for us to achieve that goal. And you might even have that form now, right?
Thank you. I'm sorry to start off this way.
No, this is a great.
You have no idea how excited I was to get an email that said social enterprise.
This is a great resource. My colleague Ida, I believe, is on the call. Ida, can you just throw the tools link into the box for us, and that'll be your first starting point, and then feel free to email us and we can happy to chat further about the tools.
Ida, we also did that recent definition question blog. So if you could throw that in there too, I think it would help.
The other Jane has her hand up.
The other Jane has her hand up. Yes, indeed.
I know in the past I've talked about the organization Cycling Without Age, which I run, but I'm gonna, just for those that remember me, I'm switching gears for a second because I also do some coaching at a local makerspace in town. And we've been, talking about social enterprise amongst the leadership team there. And a couple of things that we do from what I believe is a social perspective is, even though it is designated for profit, similar to the last story, it really is technically run like a nonprofit. But a couple of things we do in the community is we allow volunteers to come in and work for their membership. So if, for those not familiar with the makerspace, it's a community workshop where we've got metal, textiles, woodworking shop, 3D printers, laser cutters, those kind of things. And you just pay like a gym membership and you come and use the equipment and stuff. So that's kind of the industry. And so for those that can't afford it, so we do a lot of skill development as far as teaching people new skills and stuff in the trades and stuff. But we allow people who maybe can't afford a membership to volunteer and do different jobs around around the shop to pay for their membership would be one thing we do. A second thing we do is we source low to no cost materials. So there's some great organizations, Dirt being one of them, here in Calgary, that donate a lot of their excess materials to us so that we can use that to, produce various things for sale, or for craft. It's both artists and trades. And then we host free kind of different gatherings. One would be kind of like a show and tell where some of the makers can show off and promote some of their materials, as well as kind of once a month we have a brunch and stuff. And it's really just around community building and stuff. So they're doing a lot of really great stuff in that space. And I guess when it comes to social enterprise, and and I always do appreciate that I get to sign on once a month and hear different perspectives, is what degree do you need to be socially responsible before you kind of, and I know there isn't that criteria, and we've talked about how that criteria doesn't exist, but, just from your perspective, are we starting to get close to hitting that threshold of being able to call ourselves a social enterprise? And if not, what would be some smart things to kind of push us to that spot of being a true social enterprise?
Hey, Jane, maybe I'll jump in.
I know my friends there.
Indeed.
Nice to see you in person. I've heard lots about you.
Yeah, awesome. And always how much I love makerspaces.
Yeah.
Jane, the question I have for you is why? Like, why does it matter what you're known as? Or is there something compelling you to want to be able to have that label of social enterprise?
I think it's a great question. I think the real driver is community. The group and the leadership team there are so community focused and trying to find a home for everybody and try to be welcoming for everybody. And I think I think when you are trying to build community and have people share and have people give, right? Give and take, right? Is when you're labeled kind of that for-profit business, they're kind of like, why should I fix this piece of equipment? Why should I collaborate with this person when you're a for-profit business? Like you can see, and I don't know that the community thinks that, but I think the leadership team sometimes feels less comfortable. They have this goal and this desire and this, they want to be building this community and they want to be, full collaboration and all of those great things that come with a makerspace. But I think they're struggling a bit with, their own maybe consciousness of just, the odd person that asks, how sometimes the minority can influence bad behaviors. I think that's the why. I think the why is they're not really good at promoting themselves. And they're thinking this might be one of the ways in which people can start to get their head around, oh yeah, there is a lot of social good going on here. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a great question though. It's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks
I
for
need
your
to think
answer.
more.
I figured it wasn't a straightforward answer.
Yeah.
And I can only speak from my experience. So as you know, I'm the manager of the Be Local Network. I'm also I'm the lead producer for Social Venture Institute Alberta.
Yeah.
So if any group is identified with an experiment, I name it, community-focused business, socially minded business, impact purpose-driven business, social venture leader, social innovator, we've tried and experimented with almost every type of naming out there, whether formally or in marketing materials. I don't know if this is going to provide any consolation, Jane, but what I can tell you is there's pros and cons to everything. And so, you're always going to have people that are going to identify, if you're for profit, you're going to be singing that tune to some people and they're going to resonate with it. Like Be Local is actually championed by Momentum, a charitable organization. And so we even use some of the verbiage we use is a change-making organization. So sometimes we lean into the charitable angle, sometimes it's just organization broadly. Others, we kind of focus on the sustainability piece. So depending on our audience, we find that some verbiage works and some doesn't. And so what it might be helpful is just to kind of experiment and see what works. And so that's why my question for why came in. if it was more for your stakeholders, I think you'll have a better sense of what's resonating with your stakeholders. And even then, like the opening, you'll hear from us, like there is no clear consensus. So it's not like social entrepreneurs in the room, raise your hands up. Everyone's like, is that me? So there's a lot of confusion going around. So if it is more so for internal dialogue purposes, that's a different story. And I think that's just part of a larger conversation that every organization goes through. And we're still going through it after all these years. Eventually, you'll kind of get a feel for what language really resonates for and with your people. But at the end of the day, you're going to find that everything shifts. And then once you've landed on that right thing, ecosystem will shift. And then there's another term that might be more appropriate. So I think more so than the label is the story behind the label. And the work, being able to describe the work that you're doing, that might be more important.
Yeah, no, that's excellent insight. I appreciate that, because as you were talking, I was reflecting more on your question about the why. And I think it's because we are expanding our leadership team. We're hiring right now, and we're trying to make sure that we're building, you know, culture right from day one, right? Is so important, not just in your words, but to your point, in your behaviors, right? And we want to make sure that we're hiring people that are aligned on some of those core philosophies. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think Philip, you're absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I love the question about the why too. And how do you define it internally? And then how deep you take that inside your own company and your own values. There's no such thing as a true social enterprise. It's what it means to you internally, I think, when push comes to shove. I have clients, for example, who say to me, we're not a social enterprise. Well, yeah, within my definition, they are. And I don't care if they didn't drink the label Kool-Aid. It's how do you actually work? How do you show up? And internally and in community, to me, is what's really important. So we could spend a lot of time arguing about definitions, and I'm not sure it really gets us anywhere ultimately in the end. It is about the values and how you apply them and feel responsible for your stakeholders on a larger level.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah.
Just to jump in as well, and thank you so much for the question. I'm actually wondering, based on what you said, if the issue is not necessarily whether you're a social enterprise or not, or whether you're for-profit or not-for-profit.
Yeah, we have those debates too, but
well, if you have membership who are going, you know, I'm uncomfortable supporting you because if you're a for-profit, where are the profits going? You may want to have a conversation about, you know, what are you actually gaining by being a for-profit? Like, are you getting?
Yeah, we're actually working through that transition.
Okay.
And then, of course, Jane was just recently in Calgary, and so a few of them had attended your talk and were really inspired. So it's you know, enhanced our conversation as we're going through the for-profit, not-for-profit conversation and reevaluating our why as we're doing that. Yeah. Good point.
Don't forget how many not-for-profit structures there are, and that they're not the same, right? Correct. So be careful that you make sure you look at all the options.
Yes.
Yeah. And I used the line like 2 AMAASEs ago where I said social entrepreneurship is like a party with no bouncer. It's easy to get in. The key is what you want to do once you get to the party. Okay, so it's easy for you to be a social enterprise because you know you're using business models to affect. But the really interesting thing is the kind of layers of impact that you can have, and you suggested some that you're already doing, but the sky can really be the limit. So for example, I won't tell you the whole story, but very briefly, 10 Tree is started as a social enterprise. You buy a t-shirt and they plant 10 trees. Name is Truth in Advertising. But they got some feedback from their clients, their customers, saying, well, we're buying these shirts because we're focused on the environment, but we notice they're not very environmentally friendly shirts. So then they got, oh, we should start just doing recycled shirts. And then as they thought about the recycling aspects more, last time I looked, they've now developed these various platforms. So you can actually return your 10 Tree product and sell it on the platform they've created, or you can just give it to them and they'll sell it. or you can give it to them and they'll recycle. So you can see all the kind of options if you're really dedicated to these various social purposes. And as Brittany mentioned, we do have this tool called Your Why and the 4 Ways of Impact, where you can explore, as well as we have stories of other social entrepreneurs who've really kind of pushed the envelope of how you can imagine business serving society, which may also inspire you if you're going in that direction as well. So again, thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I that was a great story about the evolution too, because it's funny, I think back of when we launched our company in 2000, my tech company that I was originally part of, we had a process where once a year we revisited our social impact. And I'm ashamed to say I've forgotten about the annual reviews. So thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, it's a very important step.
And I gotta say, I love, Dan, this party without a bouncer. I've never heard you say that. I might have to steal that one. / invite me to the next party at your house.
Jane, just to your comment about your annual review of your corporation, something that I think we need to remember in Canada is that a for-profit corporation is responsible to its stakeholders in this country, not just to its shareholders. We hear so much about the American way of being, and ours is different. So even as a for-profit, you do have responsibility to the larger group of stakeholders legally. And so, yay to your annual review. I think that's a lovely idea to just look at the bigger picture, even if for anyone who operates as a for-profit.
That's a good reminder. Thank you, Jane. All right. And I can't believe you remembered you said it 2 sessions ago. That's 2 months ago, Dan. Impressive memory. All right.
Also remembering what I said. So it's also kind of self-absorbed. So.
All right. Well, next.
He wasn't at the last one. So.
Aha. Okay. Fair.
Let's preface
Fair
it.
enough. Fair enough. All right. Next, I would like to welcome Livia. Livia, I think it works best if you can share your question with us rather than me reading it out loud, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here again. Maybe this is my 3rd time. So the reason I'm joining today is because I made it with my business idea. I made it into the Alberta Catalyzer Engage program, and they will start in March. But I have some questions that I can't figure it out, and I don't think it's in the plan what we're going to do. So the business idea is to create educational technology of some sort to support English as second language learners. I'm a LINC teacher, and I see that lots of things are not working, and I know there's tons of stuff out there, but then why my students are still struggling if there's so much out there, especially speaking. So I'm at that point when I talk to a bunch of people, but here today I have 2 questions that are very different. First, it's just me. And in this program, they expect me to have a team by the end of it. And I would love to have a team. I'm an extrovert. I'm not a loner type of person, but I have no idea how to go about it. In my immediate circle with colleagues and friends, nobody is interested really. They're very happy teaching. So that's my first question. A second question is, what are the riskiest assumptions? So I'm going with that model of testing, right? Testing, creating a prototype, creating a minimum viable product. So for a technology-based enterprise, what would be the riskiest assumptions to test? These are my 2 burning questions right now.
I've got some thoughts on the second question, but maybe Jerome or Philip would be good to respond to the first one around the team thing.
Only there was some sort of, I don't know, a hub of some kind focused around tech at a university. Jerome, would you happen to know of one?
Yeah, I had a few ideas. I was curious of how we wanted to do this, because I know everybody kind of also has some ideas on this one. Well, definitely at the Social Innovation Hub, it's really about we have tech founders that are building ventures that are fostering social impact. We have founders that are just looking at leveraging social enterprise and entrepreneurial thinking to solve different types of complex challenges. But coming back to your first question, I think there's a number of different ways that you can look at building your team. I think a lot of ventures are started with the person of one, or the first team is the founder, and so regardless, I think it's just being clear around what you're trying to build and foster, what's in your wheelhouse, from like as you're building a technical venture. Are you going to be the technical founder, or are you going to be the business founder? I think knowing what hat you're wearing is going to be really important to then be able to triage what type of skill sets that you're going to be needing to kind of map out your first prototype of the platform. I think one of the key things to always look at too is there's students that are always interested in these type of projects, folks that you've worked with in the past as well, like that's either come through your program that might be already interested because of wanting to learn from you, that they can also put in some hours in support. And then also I think there's an opportunity here as well as folks that are looking for different types of projects, so project-based work as well, that might be experts that are just trying to build their portfolio as a product developer or a UX designer, etc. And so this can be an opportunity for them to support you for a specific project, and then they move on to something else. So it just depends on how you want to look at that. But I think the key thing is being able to understand what you need from your team, so that folks can see success, and you can also paint the vision around what success looks like as you're building this. I have a couple ideas around your second question too. I think the biggest thing is a lot of times what I've seen with founders that are building a tech platform, you try to build it out build out the whole thing before really testing and getting feedback from the people that's going to be using it. And so you want to make small changes by gathering key information, and you'll let your end user tell you what you need to build versus you just building something that you think is solving a specific problem. I think start with that, but I think open it up to getting as much feedback from the marketplace, from end users. And that information is going to be key, because a lot of times from folks using what your MVP is and giving you information, through behavior, you get more information through behavior than actually just asking somebody what's the problem that we're trying to solve. So yeah, I'll leave it there and open it up for other folks to jump in.
I'm going to push even a
Thank
little
you, Jerome.
further, Jerome, what you said about the end user. I get lots of these kinds of proposals, and frankly, I'm old, right? So as far as I'm concerned, your product is not a platform, right? What is your product? Your product is the content. Platform's the delivery system. Back when the earth was still cooling, I worked in publishing, and my definition of publishing is a publisher takes an intellectual property and distributes it to its logical public. The thing in the middle has nothing to do with paper. It has nothing to do with an electronic platform. That is defined by how your customer, your end user, is going to best use whatever that intellectual property is, right? And so I worry, I think that the part of your team needs to be people who focus on the content and also focus on who is the logical customer for that content. Is it individuals? And you don't need to define this for me now, but think about this. Is this something that goes into the educational system? Is it something that's an individual sell to a parent or whoever? And how does that then affect your marketing needs and your sales needs? I'll tell you right now, it's harder to sell to individual parents than it is to get an education system to take it on as a recommended resource, or better yet, part of the curriculum. But that's a huge hill to climb. So really think about what your product is and who's going to buy it and how you have to get to them to sell to them, because that'll define your platform. as well. And I think that that's something that I see people who are trying to do this kind of thing haven't thought through really carefully before they show up at my doorstep, wanting me to finance them building their app. And it's like, well, no, because you haven't thought about what it's going to carry. Because to me, it's a carrying device and not much more.
Jump in there on the team issue. Some of the social entrepreneurs that have come to us, their biggest challenge has been being pushed into a team before they were ready by an incubator. So there's been like partnerships and things like that have been an absolute disaster. And part of the problem with a lot of these incubator supports, it's like they're the ticker box thing. So of course, teams can be very powerful. So now you got to do it and you're kind of forced into it. So of course, be open to that, but be very careful that you're picking a team at your pace and that works for you, and that you're not entering into contractual agreements that you're going to regret. Because again, some of the biggest horror stories we've seen are people that have been nudged into partnerships and teams and they weren't ready and it weren't well thought out. So please be very, very careful. Number two, on the risk issue. Part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, is your greatest risk can change daily. So what you need is a process where you're constantly getting input and thoughtfulness on what your risks are. So for the Trico program, we have a bunch of techniques for that. Number one is friendly wise skeptics. So you pick people in similar industries to you who've been there, done that, and you get on an ongoing basis their input as to what they think your biggest risks are. Number two is really mastering the art of testing. I totally appreciate the post in the other day, or that just came about Strategizer, which does testing. We struggled with the testing tool they have, so we have our own. You're welcome to figure out again what works best for you, but that process of breaking down big problems into smaller pieces and figuring out the intel that you need to know as quickly and cheaply and effectively as possible is a key skill that you're going to need to develop. And then the final key prong that I mentioned to you now, and again, we have a lot of them that are laid out in our programming, is this concept called affordable loss, which comes from Sarah Sarasvathy, which is this idea of sometimes entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs get sucked into, what can you gain by doing something? What can you gain? She says, focus on what you can lose. Because as long as you stay in this area where you're prepared to lose something, you minimize your exposure. You can actually learn your way into things. You don't have to be right. But as soon as you take that chance on something where you can't afford to lose on being wrong, that's where you need to be right and you're in jeopardy. So again, just mastering these three techniques will make you able to assess your risk on a daily basis and deal with your risk. So friendly wise skeptics, really mastering the art of testing and staying within an affordable loss zone.
So Dan scooped me. That's okay. I just want to add to that, because very in line with what he was saying, is sometimes I wonder if somebody needs a team or they might just need an advisory committee, right? And it'd be full of those kind of friendly wise skeptics or people who have experience. But that might be sort of a way to learn from these organizations a little bit more formalized, but maybe not going into something that you're not ready for, or that can be scary if it goes wrong. The other one is, as Dan mentioned, with testing and this idea of affordable loss, I'm gonna just shoot in the box a really great story of an organization testing and trying things in a tech space, really looking at like, can we even build this? And then also, but first looking at, well, what do people actually want us to build? Right? Like what will people pay for it? And it's a great example around that affordable loss piece of showing how much they were able to learn with either no cost other than time, but also the short windows in which they were able to learn. So for example, when they were looking at what can we price this at, they did a landing page, right? And got people to click. Or And what they got for that information ended up being different when they went and they spoke to people outside of a store and said, what would you pay for this, right? So I'm just going to attach that because it's another great example that we talk about in our testing materials, but a great example of how you can iterate and learn in a safe zone. And there's lots of places in which they were able to do it while staying low cost and low resources put out. So I'm just going to put that in the chat box.
I've also just added something from the Social Innovation Hub, a workshop that will be taking place. I don't know if you wanted to add more, Jerome.
Yeah, it's really around prototyping, and just kind of just being able to test ideas in quick ways to kind of see if it's a viable idea that you should take to the next level. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I think you should check out if possible. And you can get some tips and some tools around that. The next thing I would say is the one, like what I've learned from supporting folks around their expert advisor programs, as well as just coaching founders in general. It's before you start to pull in experts in, I think you got to play by doing. You got to learn to be able to articulate what is your problem, what are you building. You get to assess and evaluate, what your skill sets are as a founder, and then what you might need to be able to bring in to get to where you need to get to. The why, I think, becomes really key as well. What problem you're solving, and you got to validate that, because I think you might have an idea of this is the problem I'm solving, but your customers or your clients that are using your platform may actually think you're solving a totally different problem, or you're not even solving the problem that they actually really want or willing to pay for, coming back to a couple of the points by Jane and Dan. And so I think that's really important to just really tease that out. And I think an MVP can just be a website, right? And part of the process is how many of the past students or students that you're currently working with, or students of your colleagues that might not be ready to be on your team, are you funneling to give you the information that you're needing to then be able to support you on building the next version of what you're putting together? But the key thing is I would really spend some time really validating the assumptions, and then validating the what you're trying to build, and if it's the right thing to build for the audience that you've been engaging. And then from there, I think it's going to point you in a lot of different directions. And then you can then pull in the right people to help you with that as you're kind of fine tuning things. Because the expert, like what we've learned, is the expert is really good at at a specific type of problem in real time, because they might have that technical expertise around moving it forward. And if you as a founder may not necessarily know what that actually looks like, it becomes really hard to then solve it, because the problem is moving with you, right? And so we want you to be able to kind of have already built it with that Play-Doh, and you know what you're looking for, so that when that expert comes in, they can really help you in a specific tangible way.
Thank you so much.
Just to the thought about getting expert advice and testing, one of the most interesting stories I ever heard from a founder was the guy who started Wired magazine. And what he said was, take your plan out, get all the expert and advice and reaction you can to what you think you're going to have to do. Go home and try to prove them wrong. And if you can't prove them wrong, then you maybe need to take seriously what they've said to you. But that you have to test all that advice as well against what you know and are learning about your business. I thought that was a really interesting perspective on how to test and how to be what Brittany calls from time to time the healthy, wise skeptic around what it is you're doing and what you're hearing from other people.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Livia. Anything else you want to ask?
I don't want to take up all the time. It just so people, you said advisory committee, experts. So it's just, how do you even get there that people talk to you? I'm new in this space. I've been working with Link for like 2 years. I'm new in Canada, like 10 years. I don't have lots of work history. I have very little school. How do you? That's one
okay.
obstacle. Yeah.
The great thing about that is that's the beginner's mindset, right? This feeling that this is all foreign to you. Never lose sight of that, because that keeps you open and humble. And then what you can do is reach out to associations that are kind of in a similar area to you, or ask friends or fellow teachers of tips, or maybe Google and see if there are people in maybe either similar industries or something that's very, exactly what you're trying to do, but in a different jurisdiction. Reach out to them and ask. I'm amazed at like the entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs that have like the best advice and are the wisest, are the most open to talking to fellow entrepreneurs. So just if you want the journey of being an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, you're going to have to be getting used to just asking and seeing what happens. So just start slowly, go at your own pace, but never question the power of just asking.
Okay. Thank you so much, Danielle.
And you've done the first thing. You've shown up, right? You're in the room. We're already here. You already have our names. So there you go.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So you're on your way. That's
And
great.
sorry, can I- and I
So,
could-
oh, sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
I was gonna just share too, we worked with a number of entrepreneurs and organizations over the number of years, but one of the groups that we've been working with for a number of years, they mentioned last week, they said, and this was someone who really was nervous about just sending out an email or asking someone for coffee and asking that question, and sometimes very general question, right? But it's amazing how it will come full circle as well, because once you get that up and running, someone's going to come to you and ask you about your experience. And one of the things we talk to organizations a lot about is as you're asking for, I want to call it advice, but as you're asking about people's experience or their thoughts on things, it's always comes back to, you have to filter that piece through what makes sense for your organization, because they're not going to be in the exact same place as you. And when I talk about like a committee, the reason is because there's not one person who's going to be able to be everything for you, right? And so there's a big piece around taking the advice that people give you, asking them what experience they had or what has led them to give that knowledge, because sometimes they're in a very different experience than you've had. They've had different goals. Maybe they were burned, and that's what they're focused on. But it'll come full circle, and then it's always sort of digging a bit deeper into what's behind the advice that we're giving. So the idea of, well, we have to actually test the what advice we're giving is so true, right? And it's also, we call it owning your journey, but at a certain point you're going to pick and choose what makes sense for your organization as well.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in, one thing I would just say is there is a lot of like community that's here in Calgary and just across Alberta. So I think just get out there, just like you're attending this event, and there's probably, you could probably send a message to any of us and we'll follow up and connect you to some folks. So that's there. But I think there's a number of events that are happening, and you'll be able to build your community through that. And so just continue to kind of attend activities and events, and through there you're going to find your community, because just the question that you're asking and the type of business that you're building, people are going to be attracted to you, and they're going to want to have coffee and follow up as well. So I think that's something to also state as you're kind of building your network around this to solve this type of problem.
All right, great. Thank you. So Veronica has joined us, and she has a question, but she isn't able to speak in the meeting because of where she's located. So her question, I'm just posting it right now. What is the difference between social enterprise versus nonprofit versus charity organization? And can you please give an example of each?
I could perhaps start. So a nonprofit is a type of corporate structure, and there are a variety of nonprofit corporate structures. A social enterprise doesn't have a specific corporate structure, so we've talked about that already in the meeting about social entrepreneurship and being something that has a variety of definitions, but is more about a way of being in community and how you use best business practice in your business. And a charitable designation is a designation and status given to you by the federal government with which you can drive revenue into your not-for-profit structure. So that's an attempt. I'm sure the other panelists will have other ways to describe that stuff because they're not all the same kind of thing. This is like apples and oranges and kumquats that we're talking about here. If you want to get into what each one of those things are, not sure that helps, and I'm sure other people will have other things to add to that.
Well, and I was just going to throw it in is that you can be a not-for-profit who has charitable status that operates as a social enterprise.
Bingo.
Right. So Calgary Counseling Center, for example, would be a great example of an organization that's using a sliding scale model to have social impact. Charitable organization. So they're a nonprofit with charitable status, and they operate using a social enterprise model in some of their programming. So unfortunately, it's complicated for sure. And there's many different ways to exist in this space.
And did you have examples? Does anyone want to share examples of?
Well, Brittany
That's a tough one.
Brittany just gave a good one. I think
Okay.
that's probably the best. Yeah, you can be all three of those things. They're not separate things.
Having said that, you don't need to be all three of those things. So maybe
Exactly.
maybe it's even looking at some organizations. So Veronica, I see your question. What are the different types of nonprofits? There's a lot.
Just briefly. Just briefly, there's a not-for-profit society,
Mhm.
a not-for-profit company, a not-for-profit corporation, cooperatives. That's probably the basic ones in the province of Alberta. You can be a not-for-profit corporation provincially or federally. So it's kind of you can go down a big rabbit hole there. And it depends on what you want as an internal structure and a management structure, and how you want to operate. So we could spend a whole lot of time. It's unfortunate we can't kind of go back and forth so that we can talk about what is it you're trying to get to. That would be most help for you.
Yeah, and I would add to whether you're a straight non-for-profit without charitable status or you have charitable status, there's also different ways in which you can engage in social entrepreneurship. So there's different rules around revenue generation. And this is how complicated, this is why we said at the start, hey, we're not lawyers, because it's so complicated. There's a few different resources. So one in Calgary here, there's an organization called Integral.org that has been doing some work in helping organizations figure out what is the right legal structure for what they're trying to achieve. So they have some online tools and workshops. So they might be a good resource for you to start digging down if, for example, you are looking at starting a social enterprise or a not-for-profit. Oh, Ida has thrown the link in. Thank you, Ida. So there's lots of different ways to exist in this space. And unfortunately, it is very much a gray area.
And I think just following up on the question of, okay, what are the different types of not-for-profits? It depends on what you mean by type. If you mean like legal status, corporate structure, I think there's like two basic ones, the Alberta Societies Act. I forget the two acts in Alberta. But if you mean by types, how you actually want to operate as a not-for-profit, there's hundreds and hundreds of types. So it really depends on what you want to zone in on in terms of where you're looking for inspiration and what you want to create. But always distinguishing between the legal structure conversation is very different from the how you kind of want to operate. They're connected, but they're very different. It's kind of like the difference in, like Mr. Analogy always, is what kind of car you want to have, and then legally what the jurisdiction allows you to do with that car are the two different kind of conversations.
Veronica, was there anything else that you wanted to ask or clarify?
Just very quickly, sorry, Veronica, and looking at your other chats, the Integra.org links that have been provided in the chat, I recently looked at some of their webinars and things like that, and they do actually a good job of finding the legal descriptions, not only for not-for-profits in Alberta, but then charities, if you want to look at that wider. So they actually provide an excellent like basis for understanding the legal structure side of things.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the meantime who has a question that they would like to ask? Go ahead.
So if you're deemed, or like, is there a thing in the government where you can actually be a social enterprise, like where you can tick that box? No, because it's very difficult, like for granting and all that stuff, right? So that's where I'm struggling. Like, I've already been in business a year. I've made 10,000 gazillion mistakes because, I've been going to adventures and stuff and kind of going along that lines, but it's totally not what I am, if that makes any sense. I'm not very innovative at my age.
So I think I would just add, in terms of like figuring out what structure makes the most sense for you, because maybe a for-profit structure doesn't make the most sense for you, maybe it does, but in terms of figuring out what your goals are. So if you think that one of your major sources of revenue is going to be grants, for-profit structure might have some barriers to that, right? So it's also thinking about how are you generating that revenue and what structure allows you to generate that revenue. So you just mentioned grants, but it looks like grants is not.
No, what I meant was like, so for an example, because my space is about mental balance before we get into crisis, right? And we have like a lot of arts and crafts, and then we have open mic night stuff for the written word. And so trying to get a grant to get the proper music equipment for a mic and stuff like that. That's what, just a little bit of help here and there.
Social entrepreneurs and people who develop things out of things they've experienced and their needs that they've seen, right? And it's such a fantastic space, because often people think, well, I'm just going to solve this problem for someone else, but not really understand what does that look like and what are some of those things that would have really improved my life if I had had them at the time. So there's never a need to apologize. And it's so fantastic to see people who are passionate about this. And Dan always mentions to me sometimes when we're talking about, how people approach this, is it might be side of desk, but it can't be side of heart, right? It needs to be really core to the work that they're doing. And that's really amazing to see, and also is going to be key to your success, right? Because a lot of times people will just come up with an idea, it doesn't work, and they'll drop it, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of barriers and there's things to come around. So some of those tools that I mentioned to you, starting to think about well, what's our why? It sounds like you're very grounded in your why, right? But what are the different ways that we can have impact, right? And then thinking through, okay, in that journey and the impact that we want to have, what is key? Is that microphone key, right? And if it is, if this is what we've developed, one is always thinking about what's in our capacity. So do we need everything today? Maybe not, right? There's going to be some evolution pieces as you develop of trying and testing things and saying, this is what's available today. Down the road, this is where we want to be. And having that picture is so key to the decisions that you're going to make, right, along that path. And then it's starting to think through, okay, if I need the mic, what does that look like? So it's not like you're looking for a huge government grant, you're looking for equipment, right? So how do we get equipment? And there's tons of different avenues to do that. So it could be a grant, it could be something like that, but it also could be, are there any local music stores that are passionate about, maybe not even local, because you're in Fort McMurray. I know, I realized that as I said it. Maybe not in Fort McMurray, but provincially, nationally, is there someone that's getting rid of something, right, that we could take as well? So one of the organizations I worked with is they were trying a pilot, and there was a clothing store that was closing down, and they were able to get all their shelving and all of their racks, right? So there's lots of different avenues. And so when I work with groups, it's really figuring out how we can have impact, what's key to us today, where we're headed. So I talk to them about where I want to go, the top of the mountain, this is where I want to go, where I am now, and how do I make that journey? And then I would also work with them to say, what key steps do I have to take? And whether it's I need a stage, I need a microphone, I need these things, what's it going to cost me, right? And sometimes the cost might be I have to buy the microphone, or sometimes it might be I'm going to spend some time trying to figure out are there any organizations that are out there that are passionate? My guess is that there's going to be people who are aligned with you, even if they're not in Fort McMurray, that are going to be excited by your story, right? So it really depends on sort of the scale. And so, like I said, it's a gray area because, for example, as a for-profit, you might not have access to what people traditionally think of as grants, but that doesn't mean there might not be equipment and music specific grants that you could be applicable for. Or the other thing is, I don't think you would need to get a loan for a microphone, but different types of money, different types of money depending on the size of what you need to purchase to start moving on that journey is what I would add.
I agree with what you're saying, and just so that I can show that I've been trying to do that. So I have live birds and I have fish tanks for those, but I really wanted a water feature, and I went and looked at they're so expensive. So what I've done is we've made this shell, and once it's snowing and the weather is nice, we're actually asking community members to bring in a rock. They could do whatever they want, paint it, put their name, and they're actually gluing it in place. So my water feature is for the community, built by the community. Does that make sense? So I'm definitely hearing you.
100%.
It's just, I'm really struggling up here, and I've sort of been involved with Craig, Elias. I'm really struggling to find people aligned with me. I have actually called out to the Social Innovation Hub in Calgary, and I don't think I was able to really relay what I wanted because I don't know what I want. Does that make sense? Okay. Jane, I love you. You just keep agreeing with me and make me not feel crazy.
And 100%. And as I said, feel free to check out the tools that I said.
I will.
Sorry. Connect with us, because there's going to be some tools that you can start really thinking about, where do we go? And then as you start identifying those things, then it's digging to, well, where do we actually get these now? Right. But I love the community focus, and I love how committed you are to this. And so that's always such an exciting thing for us to see. So thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else is welcome to add.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I have really good news for you and some bad news for you. So the really good news is the federal government has changed its regulations of foundations, allowing them for the first time ever to actually fund organizations that aren't charitable. So it sounds like even though you're not charitable, because getting charitable status is complicated and things like that. And the reason they did this is because there's on the ground organizations such as yourself that aren't charitable who deserve funding. So that's like the good news. So you're going to have all these foundations in Alberta and probably even nationally that are focused on issues that are similar to what you're doing. That sounds like you would be a perfect fit. The bad news is because this is just new legislation, foundations are figuring out their way around this. So unfortunately, it'll take some time. So you may want to open up to conversations with foundations, like I'm thinking Suncor, and I have no idea, but that might be. So unfortunately, you're going to have to hunt for a while to kind of find partners. In terms of empowering you to figure things out, as Brittany says, there's the tools. But if you're ever feeling lonely or frustrated, please you should have like some supports that are helping you with this vision that you can rely on. But if you're finding that's not good, give us an email at Trico and we'll see what we can do to like help you out. So if you're ever kind of like feeling overwhelmed, know that you have both your own circle to kind of fall back on, but also foundations like Trico that you can reach out to if you're feeling that it's getting too much for you. Okay.
Right. Well, thank you, Natasha. And I think it is really great to share this. It's important that you know, your why is so clear, and it's really, I hope that you keep coming back, because there will be more people here in different months that come with different perspectives, and you're going to find your people that are going to help you move this forward. So I really hope you keep coming back. Does anyone else? I have a question on the back burner here, but looking at the time, I just thought I'd make sure that is there anyone else who has a question they would like to ask? Jane.
Sorry, I mean this with good intention, but just as you were talking, I hit the Trico Foundation's webpage, and the first thing it says is that they offer grants to charitable-based organizations. So has Trico, even though they may not have updated their website, and I know I'm always the last person to update my website, so I'm not poking holes, but have they started to look at that, and are they on that journey of starting to open up to nonprofits yet?
So what I will put is we are a charitable organization. So as CRA stood before this new legislation, we were mandated to only supply grants.
Yeah.
We also had some awards that were available to more different structures, but grants to charitable organizations. So as Dan mentioned, we are on top of and paying attention to all of the federal legislation stuff. The guidance just came out like 2 days before Christmas or 4 days before Christmas.
I recognize it's new. Yeah.
Yeah. So our team is looking at that, but it's going to take time for foundations to determine how does this play into the work that we do. And the other thing is some foundations are small, right? And so opening up the world may not be within their resources. So
absolutely.
That's another thing I think to consider for our fellow foundations out there. But Dan can add to that.
Yeah, the challenge is every foundation has to state its objects and register them with CRA. Because the history of foundations was you're only supposed to give to qualified donees. To get permission to exist from CRA, we said our objects are to only donate to qualified donees, which now means we have to change our objects. So we're in the process of drafting that to then get permission from CRA to then do it. But it's interesting, there's some foundations that are currently doing that right now, and I don't quite know how they done it so quickly, but I was ironically just in a webinar today where Model Foundation, which primarily focuses on Quebec, but also does some national stuff, said that for 2023, so the challenge is the federal legislation, I think, was like 2022, but the directives from CRA as to how to do this, the guidelines was, as Brittany says, just December of 2023. But apparently McConnell has been doing this for all of 2023 and said that they've issued $4.6 million in grants to non-qualified donees. So if you're kind of in a rush for this, and I totally can appreciate that, not only yourself, but others are out there, you may want to try giving McConnell a call. I wish that the Alberta foundations would actually share who currently is willing to fund non-qualified donees versus those who are in the process, but I haven't been able to get that information. I promise you, if I do get a list of that, of Alberta foundations who are right now willing to fund non-qualified donees, which is what they're called in the legislation, we'll definitely put that link in the AMAASE chat.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I do work a lot in the Quebec area as well. So I'll let my chapters there know that information. But I have heard, and it's only rumor. I shouldn't even say it on a call that's being recorded. I won't say the rumor who I know who's starting to do it. But thanks. And I didn't mean to call you guys out. It was just more of a curiosity, right? Because I know you guys are leading the way. So wondering, where you guys are in the journey probably speaks to where others are, which is, miles behind. So thanks for
I don't know if I'd say that, but also don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't even consider it a call out. That's a totally legit question, and I thank you for it.
I'll see what I can find out from certain community foundations that I talk to from time to time. I know some, it's to some extent, it's what's the personality of the foundation? I have heard certain CEOs say, what are they going to do? Put me in jail? So some have different attitudes than others, but Dan's right about getting the paperwork done properly is a good plan. You don't want to have to fight with CRA.
Well, and I don't want to put anybody in a situation where, they've in good faith given money, knowing it's going towards a cause they believe in, but then having the ramifications of, when it comes tax time, right? So I know it's going to be a juggling act for a while.
And we're one of the few foundations actually focused on social entrepreneurship, which is a really hard concept for CRA to wrap its head around. So we're already on thin ice. We thought we didn't want to push our luck with the non-qualified donee stuff.
We did have a question that I'm not sure if this person is here, but I think it's probably a good question that lots of people have, asked about. And that is in relation to marketing for social enterprises. So the question says, in expanding a social enterprise market, what are the most valuable marketing tips that you have for today's world? And a more specific question, are phone calls passé?
I would so come back with a question, and I know that person's not here because I
Yeah.
want to know who their customer is, because
Yeah.
some customer groups, phone calls are not passé, and some customer groups, phone calls are very passé, right? Depending on the generation. So that would be my question: is go where my thinking is go where your customers are, and without knowing who your customers are, that can be really tricky.
Yeah, when I read this question before the session, I thought, well, that'll be an interesting discussion with the person, because unless we actually know who they're marketing to, you can't just kind of answer the question as a one-off.
I might jump in on the marketing question, and I know that we do need a little bit more specifics. But some initial thoughts I had to this is I love what Brittany had to say, right? Go to where your customers are. But I also think it's important to stand out from the noise. And so sometimes that can result in going to different mediums because no one's playing in that space. The other thing that I would especially when it comes to social enterprise, I would argue that this may be more true than other businesses because there is that emotional connection to the impact. I often stress the importance of relationship. And so I think we often view marketing as a way to obviously sell things, but a way that we might want to look at is what is a way that we can help foster and build long-term relationship. And that might provide some nuanced insight as to the typical marketing funnel. We might find inspiration from unorthodox channels. And so oftentimes, for example, one of the things I'm trying to build a community of social entrepreneurs. Oftentimes they're incredibly busy, and a lot of them are in email, but does that mean they want more emails coming to their inbox? And so I text a lot of people, and obviously I'm not blanket spamming people, but I'm very selective of how and when I go about doing that. And not surprisingly, the response rate by texting is double, triple the second medium. And so I might just kind of plant those two seeds with you. One, just how can you stand out from the noise? And secondly, how do we view this beyond just the transactional relationship and more about long-term engagement, more long-term relationship building?
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that too, some of the key things that we kind of have been looking at our creative studio as well as in our sales convo was one, I think there is multiple ways of engaging with your customers and the folks that the audience that you're trying to reach. And I think you got to do all of it. When at the end of the day, you just and really doubling down on what Philip just highlighted, it's really about building a relationship. And so it's figuring out how do you want to build that relationship. If that's going to be online, social media, particular types of advertisement and key marketing and really understanding what your key messages are. But then it's also getting in person and being connected to where your audience is actually at and building relationships there, but also being seen there. And then I think there's another strategic piece that one sales expert highlighted is really looking at the data around postal code and where people live and the stats can information of who you're trying to engage and making sure you have a presence in that neighborhood or in that region and so that you become more targeted to what you're trying to the folks that you're trying to engage and really looking at the data that's already out there. And then the last thing I would say is storytelling. People are motivated by and connect to stories. And so you have to ask the question, what's the story that you're telling to different audiences and to the folks that you're trying to engage? And then also, if you're not telling a story, that's telling a story. And so trying to figure out how do you tell this type of story that's going to compel and connect to people so that you can build a stronger relationship, build trust, and then foster some levels of impact.
Great, thank you. Okay. And before we go, I'd like to give the panelists or anyone else in the room an opportunity to share any updates or interesting information with the crew today.
Well, I'll share something. And Philip may actually like this. So this will be like the bonder between me and Philip. I must confess, I watch a ridiculous amount of rom-coms. And I think I'm going to embark on the most important phase of my career. Is I've noticed that a lot of these rom-coms actually have social enterprise themes. So a lot of them are kind of like pro-buy local, environmental and stuff like that. So the next mission in my career is I'm going to try and convince people that rom-coms are really just social enterprise comms. Very excited about that.
I love this. All right. Tonight's the right night for a rom-com, isn't it? There you go. Inspired. All right. Well, on that happy note, thank you so much for joining us. And please join me in saying thank you to our panelists who have joined us today. We really appreciate having you here. What is a rom-com? A romantic comedy. So tonight's the night, you know? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a month's time.